Okay, so our presentation begins. If you take a look at the first part of what you've got, there's a variety of topics. I've got a number of sessions that this will go over. Exactly how many weeks it'll take, I don't know, but there's sort of different pieces, sort of packages. So we'll hit the intro today. And if you take a look at that, let's look at some of the different things that we're going to go over. And let's first have a little conversation about why is Greece itself important for the Christian faith and biblical studies? I mean, to just do it as a vacation review could be neat. Have you ever been there? Let's go look at stuff. But we're here as a church congregation, so let's explore why Greece and some of that surrounding area is really helpful for understanding some of the Old Testament, but particularly much of the New Testament, and understanding biblical studies in general. So that's, I think, a neat thing on that. A question I do have, has anyone else here ever been to Greece or Turkey or even the Holy Land or anything like that?
Just Israel.
Okay, you've been to Israel?
Not rest.
Okay. As much as there's all these ancient places, you got Rome and Italy, and you've got, there's pieces there. There's certainly pieces of Europe that are ancient. Greece, we're going to find, has a really interesting impact, though, because it's a cultural impact on some areas that are really fundamental to understanding what was happening in Israel, what was happening in the realm around it, even what was happening in places like Rome. Greece is this central influence because of some time beforehand and then what happened with the cultures around it. So, let's first understand where we're talking about. So if you look at that, here we have an image of the sort of lower Europe, upper Africa, and part of that sort of edge of the Holy Land in Arabia. Greece is that really little, that sort of big circle dot. You can see where it is there at the bottom end of Europe, but it's a crossing point into Eurasia. It extends down into the area of the Mediterranean. You can start to see, there's not really a scaling on here, but you can start to see, relatively speaking, and this will come back later, Italy is to the west. So Italy is over on this area. To get to Israel, you would go from someplace like Rome. Either you have to go up and around and down land areas. That's a massive long area to go around. Or you would take a boat. You'd come down to here, somewhere along the east coast of Italy. You'd hop across, and then you would cut across down on the south side of Greece, here where it says Athens, the area of like the Corinthian Canal. We'll get to that. And then you would go either along the edge of Greece. So you'd either come along here, or you would take a boat across. This is the area we're going to see as we go that. That's the Corinthian Peninsula, the Corinthian Canal area. So if you're trying to get east to west, you have to go through Greece. That becomes not only that, but like Israel, and when we've had conversations in the past, Israel was on a path between empires. So the Egyptian Empire down here, the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, everybody else, they all came through. That's why Israel got conquered. So because to get anywhere, you had to go through Israel. And this was just like desert. So this was where you would go. There you could find water. Well, you're going to see the same thing here. To get anywhere, you went through Greece. Zooming in a little bit more, that gives you an image of the scale of the continental United States relative to Europe. Sometimes we forget how big we are Now again, relative to China and relative to Russia and Australia, but wow, the United States stretched end to end, all of Europe fits within the United States.
And people from other countries will ask you why you haven't ever been to see the Statue of Liberty. My gosh, do you realize how long it takes to get there?
And it's like our states are like their countries. Is a best way to think about it. Now again, they can come over here and forget. I had a good conversation with somebody one time. They had gotten over and it was a plane flight coming back, and they were getting ready, and they were telling me, we're going to go here and go here and go here and go here and go here. And I'm thinking like, how long are you in the United States? Oh, we're going to be here for 10 days. It's kind of like, you have not done your planning, obviously. How they could come across and be on a plane and think they're going to get from, New York to Florida and visit. And
Never get out of Florida.
it's just, but that gives you a sense of scale. Now, another piece of that scale, as you start to think, this is just zooming in to Greece itself. Now, what we've got here is these different areas of Greece. Get into that a little bit. You've got the southern Greece area down here. This is this Corinth area, some of those things that used to be. You've got Athens, what's in Islamia. Greece kind of rolls around. We'll see a little bit more shape. And it's got these different regions that are some of these different names that you can see. Kavia and Katia. This over here on this side, so you've got the Aegean Sea. So the Aegean Sea is on the east side of Greece. It separates it from Turkey. Now, all these different islands, these islands are all over the place, and they've got hundreds and hundreds of islands. Some are larger, some are smaller. Most of them, I would say, fall in the category of Greek islands, but some of them are Turkish islands. But even some of the Greek islands, you can kind of see, it's kind of like over here, so it's not centered. A lot of these are still Greek islands. And then up here, this path along here is what gets you towards what is now Istanbul. What's another name for Constantinople? Does anybody remember what history there of Crusades and the Eastern Empire? So you had the Holy Roman Empire on that side. The Eastern Catholic Empire was based in Constantinople, which was also what protected all of this at one time from the Islamic invasions. So long as because that right there is a little isthmus. You have another sea. If we go back, and this all comes into play. Look at here, your Black Sea.
The Black Sea.
So if you wanted to invade Europe, you had to get past this little tiny spot, or you had to go all the way around the Black Sea. So some did. And some Mongol groups, but a lot of times what eventually happened was you had the Persian Empire and these others, they're trying to go this way, and they're trying to get in and fighting Greek and stuff like this. This becomes the choke point. If you can defend that, you can keep anybody out. But it also says to get this way, you have to go through there. So, and right now, that's, if you're familiar with what's happening in Ukraine, Ukraine's up here. Russia's right there. You've got Georgia and some of these other things. This whole argument about the Black Sea, Turkey controls it. That same isthmus, they control it, and they say, we don't care if you've got warships, you cannot go through here to get into here. You cannot come out of here to go here without the agreement of Turkey. So they've kind of locked out and said nobody's warships go through. We don't care if you're Russian. You can get grain ships, you can get commercial ships, but nobody's warships are going back and forth. And unless you're going to attack Turkey, you don't just sail through their isthmus because they got both sides of it, and that would just be stupid. So they locked this thing up, and that means Russia has a Black Sea fleet. They can't reinforce it. The only thing they can do is try to build ships somewhere here. They can't reinforce it from anywhere else. And they can't get anybody else out down to here. So there's all sorts of interesting things with that. But it gives you an idea that at some of the geography. Let's look at this. North Carolina. Yeah. That's how big Greece is.
Holy cow.
It is almost identical. It's like within 10% of the square miles of North Carolina. Just shaped different. Greece is shaped kind of like this tilted L. You can see an L and just tilt it.
Tilted North Carolina, that may almost be exact.
Yeah. And you can also notice like our state is this sort of long this way and sort of skinnish this way.
Theirs is a curve. Very
And a little bit more of a curve, but there's some similarity. To get to the south corner to the upper corner, that's a long haul.
Yeah.
But to go from here to here is only like, 75 miles. So they've got spots of Greece that are really narrow. That's the nature of these smaller countries, just like Israel. Israel is this long, skinny thing, and one of the reasons they're anxious is they got areas that are only 25 miles wide, officially. So you've got some interesting dynamics of scale and space, and we start thinking those ancient Greek cities and those fights and these groups that you talk about. Where's Athens and Sparta, and they're fighting with Thebes and this and that and the other. Okay, where's Charlotte and Raleigh?
Raleigh, yeah.
I mean, you're talking, okay,
Yeah.
Charlotte to Raleigh. You could have two city-states. Now, how big was a city-state? There's all sorts of that in terms of the scale, but you could march there. Now, it might take you more than a day, but it's not going to take you years. It's not going to take you months even to get from here to here. It's going to be a hike, but it's doable. Or you get in your boats and you go from here to here. It doesn't take you that long. With the caveat, what's the weather in the Aegean Sea? And does anybody remember some of the little comments about Paul when he was on the boats and they had the storms? And if you look how many old shipwrecks, you get a big storm on that. It's still big enough to get big storms. And in that era, you didn't have the monster ships that we have now. So you take any kind of a naval power, and there's a whole bunch of development between these smaller boats, and then they got bigger, and then you got what became these commercial fleets, literally commercial. Greece became huge because it had a big fleet, smaller than some other countries did. There's a whole bunch of things. Greece was known, and the Romans were known, for example, both Greece and Romans, more of emphasizing infantry and land forces. They had navies. You had some other countries that emphasized their navies. But then you got, who's growing and who's doing this and all this pressure. But if you were going to have a navy, you had to be able to figure out, could you navigate? This will come up when we start talking about some things like down here. We'll get to some of these islands down here. What happens? How did you navigate before you had sextants? Before you had GPS? You had stars, but before you had a sextant, you would have sun. Then it's because it was certain stars and certain land masses. The easier which you could be, you've got lots of islands. So you would navigate from island to island to island. You knew that island was, and that one's visible. The nice thing is you had lots of islands. So if you learned your islands, you could still get reasonably good. Okay, I got from here, I at least got to go that way. If I go that way for a day, I'm going to see the next one. Because it's not that far. So long as you don't have a bad storm. If you get a bad storm, you got a problem. Here is a little bit more of a review of some of the places that we went. Let me come on this side. So, you'll see each one of the things that is in big, bold face. Ephesus, Turkey, one of Paul's stops. The island of Patmos, we'll talk about that, where John was at when he was doing. Mykonos is not in Scripture, but it's a neat place a lot of people have heard about, so we will have just a little snippet on that. Crete, arrow down here. It's huge. Crete is a big island. It is not the biggest in the Mediterranean, but it's one of the three biggest. It's very large. We'll get into that. Crete is the location for Knossos, and the Mycenaean, their civilization. You have Sparta down here, historical. You have Corinth, so you have this kind of comes through, and there's Corinth's on this little corner. Little tiniest spot right there. This is all saleable, and then this was the spot where people tried, and when you get there, we'll talk about, they tried to create a canal. They didn't have a canal to begin with, but it was the shortest spot. So literally what you had is people would come here, they'd unload their boats. You had a whole commercial portage system. And this happened at different times, different leaders, Romans did it, stuff like this. And you had leaders trying, Nero was one that wanted to build a canal, and there's lots of times you realize when you see it why it was hard. But the point being is, it was easier to take things off of boats, pay the local folks, they owned it, to carry your stuff from here to here, and put it on another boat and take it, than it was to go around here. Not only because of distance, but because if you were on the water and you had storms, this was the exposed area. But now you're open Mediterranean down here. This at least was sort of semi-protected. You get out here, you're right on the bottom end, you're out in the Mediterranean. Big storm. So it was safer to go here, pay the money here, which made Corinth immensely wealthy. What do they do with that? Delphi. Anybody familiar with that one? The whole oracles of Delphi?
Yeah.
The history there goes back as far as most anything else. Thermopylae. The battle, the Spartans, defending against the Persians that were invading. Larissa we'll get into just a little bit. Meteora, interesting, that's not biblical times, it's post-biblical, but it'll be really interesting to understand some of the monasteries and some of the later history of those that were trying to avoid persecution and separate themselves from the world and protect themselves from raiders and others like that. Mount Olympus, everybody knows. Philip's tomb, Philip II, King Philip, the father of Alexander the Great, which gets into why, and we'll spend a good bit of time on that because it's not so much Philip, there's some there, but Alexander was the influence of everything that then followed. He was really the founder of, you might say, of the Greek Empire. I mean, Philip was a king. Alexander was a king.
Philip was Macedonian king.
Yep.
Philip was.
Yep. And that's where you get things like Philippi and stuff like this. But so he had area, but his son is the one who spread. Philippi at the top, and Lydia. Anybody remember the name Lydia?
Yeah.
Okay, in the Bible, Paul moves and he goes in that area, he goes to Philippi. Lydia was the site of the first baptism, and the recommendation of that, stuff like that. So those are some of the areas that we'll visit on our little adventure. Now, let's hit Crete. So we get out of the way. You can now see the scale, 20 miles. 20 miles. 60 miles from that tip down the creek. But you're still, if you're in a small boat that is either out on sail or with rows, now again, when you finally got some of these later civilizations, and they had things like triple tiered, what's known as a trireme, you're hauling. You just get the slaves and you just keep them going. But in these other things, you can realize that's a good way. How far can you see? If you're on a short boat, how far can you see? But if you can get here and here, and okay, I get here, I go south. It won't be that long before I can see this. Over here, you've got places like Rhodes, you've got Patmos, you've got a lot of these islands. But the point being is you can start to see the scale of Crete from end to end. Now, skinny, but that's pretty big. It's a pretty big island. So we'll get to Crete. And Santorini's there, again, it gives you the scale. And I think we got one more, and there's going to be time for us to be done for our friends that are coming. That is Paul's journey. This is his second missionary journey. He had a couple.
Wow.
A lot of that's on land, some of that's on water. Nowadays, yeah, you can get on a bus and you can get on a boat and you can do that in a reasonable time frame. Back then, this was a long way to go.
Yeah.
And what kind of roads did you have? And how safe were those areas? Now, it was the Roman era when Paul went. The Roman era, you had what was known as the Pax Romana. They couldn't guarantee safety, but on the Roman road was relatively safe compared to a lot of other places. But it was still, you had bandits, you had animals. They talk about, you could be on that road and have a lion, you had bears, you had other things. There was a lot. It was undeveloped. And you had the distance between, even though they were smaller cities, you had distance there. You got mountain ranges and everything else to be able to travel to get across there. So we'll understand that, but I think that gives a little bit, hopefully gives you a little bit more sense of scale and distance. And we're not going to hit everything on his journey, we're just going to hit some select places that were part of that second missionary journey.
How long was that missionary journey?
I think most folks consider that probably 2.5 years, 2.5 to 3 years. Yeah, and the first time around he stayed in some places longer, so the second time he's kind of like visiting again, and so it's interesting to say what that whole path looked like, but 2.5 to 3 years, there's no way to do it in less than that. I mean, you had to stop, and you had to be somewhere, and then he was trying to be there and teach and preach, and then he'd be there for a while. And that concludes our geographical overview. So we'll come back. We'll come through a little bit more of why Greek and things like that, and the geographic and the history overview next time. You are welcome.